Hello and welcome to College of Idaho Insights. I'm Dustin Wunderlich, and today I'm here with Professor Steve Mon from our Department of History and Professors Jasper Lukowski and Carrie Hunter from the Department of Political Economy. Today we'll be talking about some of our professors' picks for their summer reading lists. Jasper, why don't you get us started out and tell us what you're planning on reading this summer?
Well, I have a whole list, and that's what I do every year, and I tell students to do that too, that they should choose at least 5 books to read for the summer and write them down. So it's not just, oh yeah, I'm going to do that, then you get to the end of the summer, you didn't do it. So you write them down so you have them there. I also tell them that they should spend at least an hour a day reading them, and in a place, in a situation where they're focused just on that. So there's no Facebook, there's no cell phones, there's no other things going on. Tweetings and even music, that you just concentrate on your reading for about an hour a day, and then that helps them learn how to focus better. So I just picked up, as a matter of fact, these were 2 books that are just on order that I just got at the library. And what I've been looking forward to for about, I guess, 5 or 6 years, this is, I'll show it up here. This is called The Passage of Power by Robert Caro. And this is his 4th book in the biography of Lyndon Johnson. And what I find interesting is I'm going back, I'm rereading the first 3 before I get to this. And in the first book again, and he mentions how in the introduction how the first book was one of 3 books he was going to write on there, and now he's up to the 4th book of the trilogy, and this one only is like a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy,
Right.
And he's
You'll get to volume 10 and Johnson will have his hair down, boys, his fingernails.
And he'll have to read 9 books before he reads the 10th book.
Exactly.
So his list will be just Johnson.
And when you get to this only goes through 64. It's mainly his transition from the Senate, and that was as the leader of the Senate, to being vice president, and that's not a whole lot going on there. And then basically, really, Kennedy's death up until his election in 64.
If people want a preview of this, there's an excellent piece by Caro in the New Yorker, which focuses on that moment of the assassination in Dallas and what happens in the immediate aftermath. It's really fascinating.
There's also, I believe Johnson is the only president to be sworn in by a woman judge on the airplane.
And that was on the airplane. I didn't know it was a woman though.
Yeah,
because she's not in the picture. Really, when he's waving.
Maybe he doesn't.
He does mention it.
The other thing where you can get a preview of it, he did a couple of interviews with NPR, and both of them are up on the NPR's website, and they're quite interesting too, as kind of a preview for it. But I think this book, again, I haven't read it yet, but I would assume if it's like the others, you can kind of dive right in. You don't have to read the first 3, though I would recommend you read all 4. That's something to do this summer for you.
So while Jasper's trying to figure out what made Lyndon Johnson tick, I've set myself a little more lofty goal this summer. I'm trying to decide whether or not God really is dead.
And who killed him?
And
or her,
who's responsible
or it.
for doing so. So I've decided to reread this summer After Virtue by Alistair MacIntyre. MacIntyre seems to buy into Nietzsche's claim that God is dead, not that Nietzsche claimed to have killed God. He's just the messenger boy, don't shoot him.
He's already dead.
He wasn't, he was just... Well,
He is
won't
dead
go into
now.
that. Yes.
MacIntyre is suggesting that, at least I think, but that's why I'm wanting to reread him, that indeed we moderns can't seriously talk about ethics because we don't have the capacity to talk about ethics because we don't really believe in any kind of absolute good. However, the famous or infamous John Rawls argues that any well-ordered society must have a theory of justice that precedes, that underlays any law that we pass. So Rawls, in a sense, is saying, in order for America to be a well-ordered society, or for any modern society to be a well-ordered society, God must still be alive, in a sense. And so I'm trying to figure out whether this is the case by reinvesting some time in McIntyre. Not
What I
necessarily the
find-
most riveting read, but
It just earlier this week, as part of the faculty evaluation process, I sat in on Greg McElwain's The Good Life course. He's a new philosophy and religion professor, and his students were reading an excerpt from McIntyre. And what I found interesting is looking at his whole syllabus. What he starts the class with and spends a great deal of time on is Aristotle, and then he's ending it with McIntyre, and I think that's you need to know Aristotle to an extent to really see where McIntyre's come from. That's why I really liked how Greg was doing this, is how he's giving you the basis in Aristotle, but showing how McIntyre says, hey, that's still relevant today.
Well, if you all are pursuing lofty goals and the pursuit of power and understanding, and I'm actually much more interested in reading something that's fun and interesting. So this summer, the second volume of Hilary Mantel's historical novel about the era of the Tudors and about Thomas Cromwell is due to come out, called Bring Up the Bodies. And her first novel in this trilogy, called Wolf Hall,
Now, this is only going to be 3 books, though,
She's
right?
she's a novelist, so she can end it where she
Yeah,
wants.
right.
The
They can
problem
dive
with
in.
historians is you just keep finding more stuff, and
Right.
it consumes you. But the Wolf Hall won the Booker Prize in 2009. And I would advise any students who are looking for high quality, interesting, and thoughtful literature to look to the Booker Prize lists. You can find them online. The Booker Prize has been awarded in the UK for many years. It's not simply a British award, although mostly it's British and what you might call former colony, right? Possessions of the British. So you'll see a number of Indian, Middle Eastern, post-colonial writers also being listed there. But Mantell herself is English, and she's really interested in this period of the Tudor dynasty. And what she did in Wolf Hall, it's probably one of the best historical, and I like historical
Well,
novels.
that's
but
what I was
read
going to ask you.
many-
As a
I-
historian,
right,
what's the value of a historical novel?
I'm going to get there. So there's a
Just
lot of
making sure.
crappy historical fiction
Yes.
out there because a lot of people, they want to tell it like it really was. And that's not the job of a novel. The job of a novel is to create compelling, interesting, and realistic characters. And what Mantell has done is she's essentially centered this around Thomas Cromwell, one of the critical advisors to Henry VIII. In fact, the man who engineered the divorce from sort of his wife, Catherine of Aragon, and the marriage to Anne Boleyn, so that his child, right, whom he hoped was going to be a boy, but turned out to be a girl, Elizabeth, would be legitimate, right? And in the process, he broke from Rome. He brought the Protestant Reformation to, well, sort of, to England, because he remained a Catholic in doctrine. And in the past, there's been a tendency to see Cromwell as nothing more than a ruthless ideologue, and he's been very poorly compared to Thomas More, right, the famous author of Utopia, who has been seen as an idealist and the man for all seasons, as in the
Right.
famous 1964 movie. And what Mantell does is she takes Cromwell and she humanizes him. He is in some ways a modern person in his thought processes. He is a thoroughly believable character, and she casts More as instead a kind of ascetic neo-Puritan prig, right? It's a really interesting transformation. It's also a great novel. It is the kind of novel in which an individual who is seeking power and seeking to do good at the same time, who is a very worldly character, but nevertheless has some level of religious commitment, is trying to make his way in a very dangerous world and raise a family in the process. It is a wonderful novel. I'm really looking forward to Bring Up the Bodies.
I'll actually spend most of my summer reading novels as well. I like reading novels in the summer rather than just academic books. And speaking of wanting a boy but getting a girl, a novel I just finished reading that I would highly recommend is the Pulitzer Prize winning Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides. It's about a 3-generation Greek-American family, and particularly Calliope Stephanides, who a young lady discovers while going through puberty that she's not a young lady after all. Rather, she's a young man who, but the doctor had misdiagnosed her sex when she was born, and so when she's going through puberty, she discovers that, lo and behold, she's not really female. But it's Jeffrey Eugenides tells a beautiful story, and it's really well worth the read if you're just looking for a good, excellent novel.
My wife Debbie actually just finished that a few weeks ago and also very much enjoyed that book.
Jasper, what's your second book that you're...
Well, I was going to say, I don't read that much.
Novels.
Novels.
I don't read that much in general. I just
Period,
skim.
right. Yeah. I do look at all the pictures.
An hour a day.
Right,
An hour a
exactly.
day.
Uh-huh.
No, it is Chris Farnsworth, our former student's new book, which is somewhat political, I guess, is Red, White, and Blood, about the president's vampire. Now, I have on my list of books for this summer is his last book, because I hadn't gotten to that yet. And then his newer book, though.
What's the first one called? I've read it, but I can't remember
Yeah,
now
I
that
read
there are
the first
three.
two.
What's the title of the first of the?
The second one's The President's Vampire.
Right.
The first one was
Blood Oath.
Blood
That's
there
right.
We go. See,
Mhm.
good going.
Which
See,
is
Jordan's there.
which
He
is a
knows what to
rollicking
do.
good read, I will say. For that kind of exciting page-turning thriller with a vampire in the middle of it.
And and to read this and knowing Chris is very interesting. How such a seemingly sane and normal boy could come up with this kind of stuff, and again it's tied politically. It has Andrew Johnson in it, and there's not many books that have
Andrew Johnson and a vampire.
Many years
with or without the vampire, there's not much Andrew Johnson.
Many years ago, Chris took my Intro to Political Philosophy course, and afterwards he told me he was afraid he was going to have to bag the study of politics and study in English because he was too much of an idealist to deal with.
And he writes about idealistic vampires.
Right.
So, that's it. Well, and maybe he got something from your political philosophy course about vampires from that.
Maybe. I'm not exactly sure how to make that connection.
So your second book, you're not very responsive.
I tend to ignore him. Actually, it's two books. It's two Idaho politics books that I want to look, and I don't have them in my office because I just got them, about two real giants in Idaho politics and new looks on them. One's a couple years old. Well, both of them are a few years old, but I haven't read them yet, so they're new to me. One's on Cecil Andrus by one of his former aides, called Cecil Andrus, Idaho's Greatest Governor, which is a big claim right there, and I don't know if I agree with that. Andrus has another good book that he's written himself, Politics Western Style, which he co-wrote with another author, which I think is quite good. But Andrus is a very interesting character. How he, especially as a Democrat, really dominated the last part of the 20th century in Idaho, and he had some good accomplishments. But I think it's more, if you would put him in a great category, is because of his style more and how he did things. If you go just by accomplishments, I think Robert Smiley would be considered the greatest governor, and they're the two longest serving of such. The other book is McClure, about McClure, James McClure, McClure of Idaho, and it's interesting while looking at the two of them. Most of Andrus's political life was in Idaho state government. Legislator and as governor, where McClure was more in U.S. Congress, more in the U.S. government, and his influence there. And McClure was, and I think he's a very appreciated Idaho politician, not as flashy as other Idaho senators have been in the past.
When will we see Sims?
The Sims, the Craig.
Right.
We just. You just don't see them yet. So maybe.
But you might be the man to write.
Well, I don't know. Maybe we could collaborate on that. It could be
What would the title be?
a historical novel on Larry Craig.
Speaking
Oh,
of
there's a thought that I don't think I want to think. But, Carrie.
Carrie, what about yourself?
Yeah, there's another good novel I want to recommend that I actually read last summer, and this is one of, I know it's a good novel when I find myself hoping to finish it early in the morning when everyone else is asleep, where I can kind of have a good cry. And this novel did that for me. It's called We the Drowned by Carsten Jensen. He's a Danish writer. This is an epic novel, 678 pages, covers 100 years of, and it's a seafaring town in Danish town, and it's told from the perspective of the town. And the sense of community that comes out of it, the value of everyone in a community, warts and all, make me appreciate Mon all the more. It's very much a wonderful epic novel that's worth spending that 678 pages with.
But finish it in the morning.
Right.
Finish
Well-
it in the morning when you can be by
Right.
yourself.
Well, having turned to the past, I'm going to. There's another novel that I plan to read this summer that actually turns to the future or the near future. Actually, it's a contemporary novel in a way, and it's written by William Gibson, who some of our viewers might remember was the famous originator of what's called cyberpunk science fiction. When Neuromancer came out in the early 80s, Gibson coined the term cyberspace, for example, a whole variety of terminologies. Well, after the turn of the century and after 9/11, Gibson started a new series, which is called the Blue Ant series. The first book of which is called Pattern Recognition. And it's one of the first novels that I've read that, in I think a very sort of visceral way, tries to take on the sense of vertiginous uncertainty of the world following, right, sort of the attack on the Twin Towers. And Pattern Recognition focuses on a protagonist, a young woman who has a strange condition, and this is that she's sort of mentally allergic to branding.
Branding?
To branding, like the Michelin Man, for
Oh,
example.
I thought you
or
said
the-
brandy
right,
at first. It's like, okay, tell me
right.
something else if you don't like brandy.
Do you know what the Michelin Man's name is, by the way?
I didn't know he had a
He
name.
does have a name, and his name is Bibidum.
Is that his first name or his last
I
name?
think it's part of part of the original advertising slogan for Michelin tires, which was one of the first tire manufacturers. That the Michelin tire eats up road hazards, right? So it's Bibidum is it's a toast, right? You know, so the Michelin Man holds up, right? So it's not useless at all.
Animal rights advocates are also against branding.
Right, that different kind of
Sort
branding.
of branding.
And these novels follow the adventures of this protagonist as she's hired by a strangely international Belgian cool hunter corporate leader by the name of Hubertus Bijond, or it's spelled Hubertus Big End, right? You know, sort of in the novels, and they really wonderfully evoke the world of London, the world of Tokyo in particular. They follow a kind of jet-setting plot line that is essentially detective in orientation, but it is that very strong sort of contemporary sense of the postmodern, the post 9/11 that I find really compelling. And the third of the novels, Zero History, the second novel, is Spook Country. I haven't read yet, and I'm very much looking forward to reading that this summer as well.
Now, Steve, when you read some of these books, do you read them with an idea that you're going to bring some of these themes into your classes at all?
No,
Or
never
not
do
really?
that.
Just-
No, I mean, they
just
do.
fun?
They pop up.
They pop up.
Right.
And for example, in my European intellectual history class this year, we had spontaneously several discussions about novels, about how the ideas that we're reading more formally in William James or Karl Marx or Nietzsche actually finds its way into literature and the kinds of cultural trends that have defined the modern and the postmodern world that we live in. But I don't go into reading novels with that kind of intention.
Well, and I
because
don't
that makes
even-
it work, right?
But I don't even like with Lyndon Johnson, I'm teaching, I teach my American presidency course now. It's not like, okay, I'm going to use this in the class, but this is like deep background.
Right.
To give you the other book that I just picked up, The Last Great Senate, about the Senate in 1970s. My legislative process course next spring. I'm not using this book, but you just, I think to be able to teach anything,
Right.
you need just whether it's novels, whatever it is, we just have to have
You have to have that
this
deep background. But I do think the reading that you do when you're preparing for a course, when you're going to be teaching a book, is very different. I mean, I sit down, I underline, I make marginal notes, I take notes on paper, I prepare myself in a very formal way to talk about certain kinds of things. That's a different kind of reading than I think you do in
And
the
that's
summer.
work.
And it's
It's work.
right. And it is work. I mean, it's still fun. I mean, it's a great job
Yes.
when your job is essentially to sit around and read really fascinating, great books and then talk about them with really smart young people.
Speaking of a book that pops up and deep background, last spring as I was leaving the library, I was accosted by the librarian and say, we got the book for you. According to your students, you'll love this, and it was called Honeybee Democracy. I can't remember the author. I'm sorry.
Stilling the grumbling hive.
But
Now you talk.
But since I like to use a honeybee analogy when I'm talking about Marx, trying to make sense of Marx, they thought I'd like this book, and I did. But this book actually is about honeybees, and it's fascinating. Those who have studied honeybees have studied them so well that they can actually read the dance, the little dance. When you ever do see honeybees swarming, what's happening
As
is
they're doing right up in the eaves on the corner of our building as we speak.
that while they're swarming, they're sending little searchers out trying to find a new nesting site, a new hive. And these people that have studied
And they love
them,
Strayhorn Hall.
yes, they have actually learned how to read the little dance that the bee does. And one bee comes back, makes this dance, and then others go off to see whether or not that really is a good place to go. And these bee experts are able to read that dance and see whether or not they really want that place to be chosen by the bees, and they can pluck that bee out and they can actually force the bees to choose a less quality hive by mucking around with the dancers.
Well, that's kind of mean.
Yeah.
Oh, really? I mean, come on.
This is their
Scientists. They have
they
no
are
soul,
scientists
really.
are mean. But one of the fascinating things about it is the way the decision is made. The bee that first makes the discovery comes back and does his little dance. Her little dance.
They're all sisters.
They're all sisters. She never dances again. She does it once, then sits back, and others go out and they come back. And if they're enthused, then others will go out. But it's like she makes her case once, and then lets it speak for itself. And they've discovered that as long as scientists aren't messing around, the bees almost always pick the very best spot for their hive based on size, and you can tell by the dance how wide the spot is that they're dancing for. I mean, it's amazing how much information these little bees share with each other, and how democratic they are in letting everyone be involved.
It's a
in
family
this.
democracy.
Yeah, it's a tremendous.
You
Honeybee democracy.
should talk to Ron Bittner about that. A member of our alumnus and member of our board of trustees. He's
Bee man.
he's the Dr. B.
He's Dr. B, pollination expert extraordinaire.
Well, and wine.
And winemaker as well, with a wonderful winery with an extraordinary view down into the Snake River Valley and Lizard Butte. I think you can see the butte from his
Yeah, I think
deck.
you can.
Yeah, I think you can.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for sharing your summer reading picks with us. And thank you to all of our viewers. Have a good day.